Hello everyone, thanks for joining me at Card Out Spots today. I am doing a short video on throwing bowls today, but what I realized is, I don't think I've ever shown, is I usually throw off the hump, and I've never shown how I put the hump on the wheel and slap center it, which saves a lot of power in the muscles and everything like that later on. If you do slap centering like this, you don't need to do much centering. And in fact, when you throw off the hump, you shouldn't even center more than just the top. So once you have just the top centered, you can see I'm going up and down on this just a little bit, and the bottom is wobbling around, which means it's not centered yet. But just as long as the top is centered, just the piece that you're going to use, that's enough when you're throwing off the hump. And I'm doing what I did in all the other videos. It's the same. I just open it up with the thumb and give it a couple pulls and then use the tool on it. Maybe going a little faster than I should at this point, but often for opening and centering, I'll spin up the wheel a little bit faster, and then for the final forming, I'll slow it down. And once it's deep enough, I'll use the tool to go in and get my shape, my bowl shape. And these are just simple bowl shapes today, nothing special about them. I get most of the shape with that first pass. What I'm doing with the second and the third pass here is I'm trying to sort of get rid of the worst of those throwing rings, the finger marks on the outside of the pot. The tool takes care of the inside of the pot. That's nice and smooth. But sometimes it takes more than one pass to get rid of the fingers on the outside. And you see the throwing rings, there's some still left there. They're just not overly pronounced. And score the bottom and run the wire string through it, and it's done. Except I forgot my boards, my wear boards. So I'll waste a few seconds of your time here as I run off to go find some boards in a panic here. Here they are. All right, now we're in business. Okay, all is as it should be again. Again, just coning up that little bit of the top. The bottom's wobbly, but doesn't matter because the top is centered. I used a little bit of water there just right after I opened it up, but after that it is all slip. I just slapped some slip down into the center there off my finger and then sort of pulled it up the inside wall. Now for these bowls, one thing I didn't mention on one of the other videos as well, a couple of the other videos, I keep forgetting to mention it, is in order that the lip of the bowl or the vessel, whatever vessel it is you're making, doesn't look too thin, always leave a little clay, extra clay there at the rim. What I'm doing is I come up here and I'm pressing my finger from the outside and the rib on the inside there to compress the rim, and it basically creates this bevel on the outside of that lip, and it compresses it, and then it doesn't need the deer skin or anything like that treating it afterwards. It can just come off the wheel. But if you don't leave a little extra clay up there for that, you're sharpening that edge and it's real thin and weak. It looks weak and it is weak. So you want a little bit of extra thickness there so that you can create a specifically shaped lip, whatever shape you want to do with it. It doesn't have to be that shape, but at any rate, you'll need clay up there, so you don't end up with this razor-thin lip that is structurally and visually weak. So I'm just doing repetition here, but in a second I'll go over it with that pink rib, that gyuber again. And this is something to mention about the gyuber. I've mentioned before that it was developed for throwing non-plastic bodies, like basically crushed stone, like porcelain. You know, the native stone around here can be used as a porcelain body all by itself. It has very little plasticity, so it's crushed up, levigated, and made into a body. Then when you're throwing it, it has very little plasticity, so you need a tool that doesn't stretch it, but stretches it and compresses it at the same time. So that's why these tools, this tool I just pulled out now, that's why these tools were developed. And but and they work great for non-plastic clays, but you need to sort of adjust your use with them if you're using them with plastic clays and materials that have plasticity. Because normally the way you'd use them, you'd use the flat part of that against the body, and if it's non-plastic, it just doesn't really create any problems for you. But if you're using plastic clays and you're using the flat of that tool, that plastic clay, the really fine particle clay, sort of, I don't know how to describe it, kind of sucks up against that tool because of all that surface area that's being applied, and it'll catch as that pot is turning. So you kind of have to, depending on the clay you're using or the body you're using, experiment with how much of the surface of that tool you're going to use when you're forming I kind of cut myself off there on that clip, but when you're forming the pot and compressing the pot was the end of the sentence, that last sentence there. So if I was throwing something that was real, like if I was just throwing my crushed sandstone body, I would be using more of the flat of the tool there. This clay has a bit more plasticity to it, so I'm turning it a little bit more towards the edge of the tool for the forming. And if I was using a really fine clay, like some kind of maybe a Mino clay or something with a lot of ball clay or something that was super plastic like that, I might just use the edge, or even just not use that tool and just use a sharp-edged rib instead, because it would probably work better for the plastic material. Another point to make here is, you see, before I go in with the tool, I'm not wetting the interior of the pot. I'm wetting the outside so my fingers will slide. The tool itself is going to slide if you apply it in the right direction and the right amount of force. But if you apply a lot of slip there before you put the tool in, it's not going to compress the clay the way you want it to. It's going to slide over the surface. So you want to not add a bunch of extra slip or water when you go in with the tool, that last bit, on that last step. when you open the pot here, or when I open the pot here, one thing I go back and I'm doing right now is to compress the base from the outside. I'm trying to keep that diameter narrow, because what I want is I want to be able to throw the pot up here. See there, I'm compressing the base again. I'm going to use the tool and it's not really apparent from the video, but when I apply the tool down in the center of the pot, starting at the center, I'm using a finger on the outside to keep that bottom, what's going to be the foot, from coming out. I want it to come out above the foot, not at the foot. So I repeatedly compress it from the outside, and as the pot's being made, so that when I cut it off the wheel, then later when I'm doing the trimming, I don't need to cut. I need to cut very little or no, none of that foot diameter that was made when throwing. And I think we're about getting to the end here. It looks like I'm cleaning my hands off to get the slip off completely before I wipe things down. Yeah, I think that was the end of that was the last pot that would fit on the wear board there. And that's it. So thank you everybody for joining me today. Goodbye.